I'm Seth Singleton, and I'm the host of Storytelling with Seth, an audio podcast with one mission in mind, to bring you a new story each and every episode. For episode number 85, I sat down with the Unsinkable team, or at least that's what I'm calling them. They are the creative minds behind the audio drama known as Unsinkable and currently starring Brian Cox, John Malkovich, and many others. And while those actors bring the characters to life, it is this creative team that bring the audio narrative to life. They do so with ingenuity and by understanding the value of sound to tell a story. When they do this, as they do, and they do so well, they describe an experience where they are able to access the most powerful technology in existence. It's the theater of imagination, and with it, they tell a tale, a harrowing adventure on the high seas, one that you're about to learn more about. And I'm going to be honest, I wish I had hit the record button at least 10 minutes earlier because the banter was pure gold. But that doesn't mean that what I'm bringing you is any less priceless. Join me now for my interview with the Unsinkable team, one I guarantee you are not soon to forget.
And I'm also going to say, Jack, please be aware of the fact that since you have that amazing article with you, there is something of a responsibility to include that however you feel appropriate throughout the recording. I mean, you masterfully demonstrated how you could just raise it, as Misha said, shift the camera to you and then make us all feel jealous in the process. If you can utilize the bottle as well, I have the utmost.
Fair enough. Yeah, I used to be an actor. Give me a prop. It's great.
Also, if everyone's okay with it and the recording quality's fine, I've been turning some of these podcasts into a YouTube as well, just something so everyone can see the video. So if everyone's okay, just give me a thumbs up with that. That would be something.
I didn't book the makeup artist.
Yeah, I didn't shave. I thought this was audio.
I noticed.
Yeah, but the fans, they're gonna love this. It's like raw, real life, honest moments.
Oh, you know, life in lockdown, yeah.
Right. They're gonna love it. With that, I'm just going to simply say that this is another episode of Storytelling with Seth, and I am a very grateful host who was lucky enough to sit down with Jack Bowman a little while back now and learn about all of the wonders that he's doing with audio. And a hint, some teases about this amazing team, which he has thankfully brought on with me for this call today. I am with, as I'm dubbing it right now, the Unsinkable team. And I have with me each of them. I'm going to say their names, allow them to say hello. And then I'm going to do something a little bit fun with the introduction. So first off, Jack, welcome back. How are you, sir?
Thank you. Pleasure to be back. Thank you.
Happy to have you back, and I'm happy that you brought such an entertaining crew. There's been like 10 minutes of like audio gold that I did not record, and I've told them they've inspired me now to just hit the record button and make people sign releases like weeks in advance so I can capture the fun you guys were just displaying for me.
Just think of the repeat fees.
Now, lovely enough is that I can just transition with that. Who was that voice we just heard? Well, that would have to be Mr. Andrew Mark Sewell. Andrew, how are you, sir?
I'm very good, and congratulations on pronouncing my surname correctly.
I stuttered. You might have heard a hesitating pause.
I thought that was for dramatic effect.
You know, the best thing is, until I gave myself away, it could have been. It really, really could have. Next, I have with us Misha Crosby. Misha, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Seth.
Cheers. Pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. As well, I also have, my pleasure, man. This is going to be fun. I also have with us Helen Quigley. Helen, how are you?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I also have with us Mr. John Mawson.
Well, thank you for having me on, Rachel.
Oh, this is going to go so well.
This is going to go really well. In fact, the next part of it is I have to think about how it is I tell my parents my name is now Rachel. This will get interesting, but I can deal with that later. What I'd like to do next, just for fun, is to let you know that I've already spoken with Jack. So we're going to do a little bit of a fun introduction game here. I'm going to introduce Jack, who, as I mentioned, I was lucky enough to talk with before. We talked about audio production. We talked about his time, as an actor, transitioning into writing and directing, and how that's turned into audio productions that he's now involved with, everything from audio marvels to so much more. Jack, what I'm going to do is ask you to introduce John, who will introduce Misha, who will introduce Andrew, who will introduce Helen. And in this way, I'm curious to hear what each of you has to say as an introduction for the person who will next be speaking. Sound good to everyone?
Yeah.
If you'd
I
let
think
us
I did
know
well
this
there.
the night before, it would have been much more preferable.
See,
there would have
I
been-
thought about that. And then
Oh no, I'm
again,
saying there would have been bribery involved. It would have been a very different intro, but no, all good.
I understand, and I would love to imagine that I am above bribery. In fact, I'll pause for a moment.
I think Jack's going to dodge the bullet about not getting one of us introducing him. I think
Well,
part of
actually,
his cunning plan.
the fun part might be is if at the end, Helen, you choose to give, anything I might have missed about Jack.
Oh,
for our
good.
final
Yeah.
wrap
okay,
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, always leave the door open.
Hmm.
Always leave the door open, Andrew. Or at least that's the thought. So, Jack, if you would please, could you introduce for us John Mawson? What should we know about he and the Unsinkable team?
Well, the first thing you should know is of all the people here, I know John the best. So as a random lottery goes, that's perfect.
Sometimes I
So
get
John,
lucky.
I've known about 12 years now. I think we were both less grey back in the day. So me and John were both actors, and we met on a series of casting director workshops in London. And at the end of it, me and John were both off to Edinburgh. We both promised to go see each other's shows. And John was doing the Pink Floyd show, wasn't it? Where you were playing the host.
Yep.
I came along, and then John, to his credit, came to see my show, which was terrible and involved me cross-dressing as a police officer who wore tights. But at the end of it, John said to me, he said, "You know what? I think you should join my agency." And lo and behold, about 4 weeks later, I had an interview. John brought me aboard his agent, and we spent about 2.5 years working in a cooperative agency, which is a type of agency where actors represent other actors. And during that time, John said, "I'm going to get myself to America." And you know what? It only took him 9 months to do it. So before you knew it, boom, John was away, off in LA. And when I got my call up to go over to LA last year, I reached out to John, and that led to the whole Unsinkable project sort of slowly coming together as a podcast. So that's Mr. Mawson, a man who puts his mind to things and gets it done.
Wonderful. And
Thank you,
John,
Jack.
You're
now I'm
welcome.
going to ask you to introduce Misha, if you wouldn't mind, my friend.
So following on from that story, I moved to Los Angeles in 10 years ago the next week. And one of the first people I met out here was Misha. And we just knew each other a little bit socially. But I then started to cast a short film that I was making, wanted to make. And I thought of Misha for one of the roles. And lo and behold, there he is.
Yeah, gosh.
There is a very young Misha, well, very young, so 10 years ago. So I'm trying to get to it without.
It's a lovely shot.
So I'm trying to do it in such a way that I get out of the way. There we go.
You certainly look very young.
Anyway, so we made that short film, which did pretty well. It won some awards on the circuit, and it was accepted by BAFTA for consideration. And since then, we've been good friends, and we worked together on a couple of projects that he and a guy called Jared, who actually was the director of that film, were putting together. And culminating in a film called Green Rush, which is now available on Amazon. And I'm a co-exec producer on that, and also do some voice on it. And Misha is one of the producers and is in it, one of the leads. And so when Jack came over this time last year, Misha I mentioned it to Misha, and he mentioned that he was doing some voice work with someone who was about to be introduced, I think a certain Andrew. So I said, "Oh, you should meet Jack. He's coming over to do to be on a panel about podcasts or audio work." So we met up and had dinner together a year ago yesterday, I think it was, 2 days ago. And Jack mentioned that there was a strong demand for IP, and I mentioned Unsinkable. So Misha and I then started to work on it. So that's how I know Misha, and that's how he got involved.
Perfect introduction. Thank you. And now, Misha, if you wouldn't mind, could you introduce for everyone a little bit about Mr. Andrew Mark Sewell?
Andrew Mark Sewell. So Andrew and I go back even further, I think, than me and John. We definitely do, because I knew Andrew before I even came to the States. I had met Andrew through my old UK agent, Emma Angers, who was out on one of her mini nights during the week, and Andrew was probably warming the rooftop at Century, if I remember correctly. We got chatting at the time. I had, not envisaged doing anything other than acting. I think I may have already done a UK show, Hobby City, at the time, but I can't remember. It was certainly very early on, and Andrew was heavily involved in radio and audio, and we just got on very well, and we remained friends for certainly that period I was in the UK. But then he actually came out to Los Angeles. Probably he'll probably have to correct me on this, but it was around sort of 2011, maybe 2012, and he was actually shopping the rights for a big project he had. I believe it was Blake 7. He was looking he was looking to see if he could exploit those rights with some of the studios over here for film and television. And we kept in contact even then through years after. Andrew continued to build B7, and it's now got a multitude of titles. As they'll let you know almost on a daily basis. They seem to have a new one rolling out. And when it came to this, as John said, him and I had been working on it to take what John had initially written, which was initially a feature film, and a very good one, that then evolved into possible 3-parter TV series, I believe. And then from the last scripts that were around, we went and with some of Jack's advice as well, started converting them into some audio scripts that were self-contained in a sort of 20-minute arc. And Andrew had at that point come into the fold, because we talked about having a UK partnership involved as well. And so it all kind of came together from all these different angles, and everybody was able to bring a little different piece to the table. And it culminated in, here we are, all around again from different parts of the planet here on this little Zoom call that Jack has set up, and you've been kind enough to host, Seth.
I'm liking the narrative circle you guys have been taking us around. Well done. Yes, Misha, this is the fun part. Now we are coming around to the final 2 parts. Andrew, can you introduce for everyone listening and watching, who is Helen Quigley, and what should we know about her?
Who is Helen Quigley? Are you ready for this, Helen?
No.
About I'll give you the edited highlights. So I met Helen at Century. There's a theme going here, Misha.
I'm sensing this.
But I was actually at Century with Nicholas Briggs and Richard Curti doing a talk about how not to make radio drama, or rather, how to make radio drama to a room full of actors and other producers and directors and so forth. And Helen came up to me afterwards, and it turned out that we'd actually been at similar events preceding that and hadn't spoken to each other. But unfortunately, she came up and approached me about and her love of Blake Seven. So she managed to wheedle a box set, an audio box set of Blake Seven, the audio adventures that we did. And then she recklessly told me that she did BBC Radio Trails, and she was rather good at it. And she'd listened to our trails and she could do them better. And would I like her to show me how good she was at doing trails? And me never want to not look, a gift horse in the mouth. So absolutely. Dan Dare we've just adapted for radio. How about doing a trail for that? And so 7 hours of audio drama she waded through and came back with a fantastic trail. And thus was born a very beautiful working relationship. And within 2 years of that, maybe a little less, we started working on more and more things together, and I asked her to come and be part of B7 with me and help reshape and grow the company, both in terms of what we were doing with radio drama, what we're doing in terms of indie film, and also venturing into the world of audiobooks. And so when Misha came to me with Unsinkable and the possibility of needing someone to do the dialogue edit and put it together, I recommended that Helen got involved in that, although she's never forgiven me since, because it was quite an epic task, to say the least. But so Helen is the beating heart of B7. It's the best way. And wouldn't be able to, B7 wouldn't be what it is now without the partnership that Helen and I now have.
I think I'm more Scotty in the engine room. I'm the one who says, you can't do that, it'll explode. That costs too much. And that's going to take days, when I know it actually will take less than that, but it makes me look good.
Wonderful. And with that, Helen, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and let me know, and anyone listening, watching, what I might have missed in my introduction of Jack Bowman that you could share with us. And then secondly, if you could then start our conversation, which is going to move into what is an Unsinkable in your words, and then maybe get some feedback from others after you've given not only a little bit more about Jack, but your insights regarding Unsinkable.
Wow, that's a brief to follow, isn't it? Actually, Jack, I've never actually met in person, I don't think, despite him being in London. This is the first time I met Jack was actually on Zoom. And I think we connected a lot like this, and all of us had sci-fi backdrops. I think Jack had gone with his, what have you got now? I can't see what that is. Oh, it's still the TARDIS. Okay,
I've gone McGann for tonight, yeah.
Okay, good. I think Andrew had something Star Wars related, and I went with my personal favorite with the Stargate. So we just sat there and anoraked. So one thing about Jack that I do know, and I'm very happy to be friends with him as a result, is his love of sci-fi. So anyone who likes the sci-fi is good with me. On Unsinkable,
you did miss that me, you and Andrew have one connection right now on all our Zoom calls. We have one thing.
Of course, yes. We've all got Yodas. Yes.
We've all got baby Yodas.
We don't all have baby Yodas. I don't have a friggin' Yoda. Nobody gave me the map.
John has a TARDIS mug. There's two camps here, clearly. It's the TARDIS and or Yoda, so that my Yoda is behind me.
Yeah, no, grow.
Sadly,
yes!
John, it's not fucking Yoda, John.
Sadly, this is just a prop. There's nothing in it at all.
Mine's in the background.
Now, mine doesn't move. But
no, mine doesn't.
Yeah, I was. This is where I can join you in one, the sci-fi wonder, and then two, going to my local. That's awesome. My good friend, Mr. Steve J. Ray, who lives over in England, is going to freak out when I tell him about that scene. I saw this at the comic shop. The guy was unwrapping it from just getting it shipped, and I said, "Hey, what's that?" And he goes, "Oh, these are new. We just got them in." And I said, "I will be the greatest man in my wife's life at this very moment. So just wrap it up, put it in a bag. I don't care how much. Just throw it on the tab." And yeah, she shrieked with glee. So I don't know if we need to.
That's mine. There he is.
I couldn't be left
the same
out
one
of
as
that
you said. Yeah. So my thoughts on Unsinkable. it's a tale of adventure on the high seas at its core, and bravery, camaraderie, a problem solved, and almost an unsurmountable problem solved, and it's genuinely fascinating, and even more so because it's true. And I hadn't heard of it before, and my father-in-law was in the Merchant Navy on the BP tankers, I think, and he's. Were you? I mean, it might have been before your time, John, but it was probably in the 50s, maybe, something like that, 50s or 60s. But I don't recall him ever talking about it as a story or a legend from the days of the Merchant Navy. So no, I think it's a really fascinating story. And even working on the bits of the dialogue edit that I did, that being the bare bones of the structure as it is at the moment, you could really feel how difficult an experience and how intense it was, and how it's a memory that lasted their entire lives.
Yeah.
Yes, I was actually stunned when I was doing a little bit of research and discovered that there had actually been a movie made in 1943 called the San Demetrio, London.
That's by Charles Friend, San Demetrio, London.
And then I began discovering the story, which sounds like quite as you described it, Helen, so perfectly. A harrowing high adventure on the seas, a mission that has excitement that quickly turns into a bit of a survival story, and with quite some heroism displayed by so many involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tale against all odds. I mean, I love history, and I'm fascinated by the tales of heroism in the Second World War. So when I read John's screenplay, it really hit a sweet spot straight away. It is an extraordinary tale of heroism.
I knew about it because probably when I was young, I saw the movie, but also because I spent 13 years in the Merchant Navy as a deck officer. It kind of was part of the history. It was part of the psyche of it. And I remember probably 15 years ago, I happened to be, I was in the marine insurance world by then in London, and the Merchant Navy Memorial is just up from Tower Bridge, the Tower of London, and it's just down from what was the Willis building, which was the headquarters of Willis Insurance Brokers. And I remember just walking into there once, and it's a beautiful garden with panels. Underneath the panels, hundreds of them, bronze panels covered with the names of ships, and underneath the names of the men who died. And I saw the panel for the San Demetrio, and I said, I remember something about that. And then I put it together. And one of the first things I did was I wrote a little piece called Take a Walk in a Charming Garden, which I did for a screenplay, sort of type of screenplay or writing presentational awards thing, which went down quite well. And actually, there's a bit of that in the final version we've got. The bit where part of the story takes place. It begins and ends in the Merchant Navy Memorial Garden. And there are lines in there that comes from that very first thing that I wrote. And so that just sort of was on the back of my mind. And after I wrote and made 6 years, 4 months, and 23 days with Misha, the short film you just saw the poster of, I thought to myself, I better write a feature-length film in case somebody asks, oh, this is very good. What else have you got? And I thought I ought to write something really easy, cheap to make, single location, 2 people, make it for peanuts. And instead I wrote the San Demetrio, the film version, which would cost at least 100 million to make because, it's a massive on the water, tanks, massive special effects, huge cast, blockbuster.
The opposite of what you set out to do.
Exactly the opposite. But it was just, I realized, and I've written a lot, but each time I've started to write something, it's always come from the back of my mind somewhere that it's a story I want to tell. And I realized it was a story I wanted to tell. And with a background in the Merchant Navy, plus my background in writing and acting, I felt it was something I could do justice to. So that was one of the first features I wrote. And I wrote different versions of it. And then it was when Jack and Misha and I started talking, and I mentioned this one, and we looked at it and thought, well, maybe this could be a really good audio drama.
True. John had actually. This is going to sound like the cliche part of the story, but John had sent me a copy of the script, and we got on. The family had come over. My son had refused to sleep. It was the first time in my life I'd been embarrassed because he's screaming, and eventually I get him to sleep. I wanted a nap before I got to LA. I couldn't, so I went, you know what? I'll have a quick look at John's screenplay. And for like the last 2 hours of the flight into LA, I was hooked. I was just reading the screenplay page by page by page, and just went, that's actually pretty good. We should have a chat about that when we catch up. So yeah, so I took the script on a plane to LA, and by the time I got off, I was a fan. So
That's very Hollywood.
it's very Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah.
John had sent me San Demetrio in a few different iterations, including a space version. And I am almost ashamed and sorry to say, but again, it is very Hollywood to say that some of those had sat in my inbox, deliberately left as unread because I had planned to get to them. But for just months turned into years turned into, I promise I'll read it one day, John. I will. It's just that, things came up, and in fairness, we'd even worked on other things with each other since, but it was just the instigation to was there a reason? And actually that meeting turned out to be that reason because I was forced to. I had to. I couldn't turn up at the meeting not having not read the script that we were all talking about. So I at that point, of course, had to sort of delve in, and then we all had our thoughts after that, which I'm sure we'll go into more. But I think it's just even a thing of anything and getting a project done. It's just the intentions are not out of some I don't like it or I don't want to. It's just a case of what's in front of you and what the least resistance is sometimes, and what's forced to happen at that particular moment.
Yeah. You owe me a $5, John.
I'll Venmo it over to you straight away.
Thanks.
And then Misha sent me the script. I didn't think John was actually going to talk to me after I sent my notes back.
No, all good. I mean, honesty is the best policy, even if you don't like it. So maybe I ought to tell you what the basis of the story is.
That might be helpful. I was also just sort of curious how this had all sort of begun, and you've already introduced that idea so well for me before I got a chance to ask the question, actually, how the story developed. It appears to have come from one piece, became something more in this feature length idea. But yeah, perhaps we should talk a little bit about the San Demetrio and what made it such, well, it sounds like to me, and I'm looking forward to comparing my expectations with the actual product, but what it was that turned it into such a compelling narrative, and then such a wonderful and highly celebrated audio story.
So the story is this: the San Demetrio was a British cargo ship, a tanker, carrying aviation fuel for the Royal Air Force, and she loaded in Galveston, Texas, in October 1940, just after the really early days of the war and fairly early days of the Battle of the Atlantic, where Germany's attempt to win the war against Britain by starving us into submission, by sinking as many of our ships as they could, our cargo ships. So she went up to Nova Scotia, to Halifax in Canada, and they formed where a convoy of 38 ships was formed to be escorted across the North Atlantic by one elderly Royal Navy ship. The Royal Navy was stretched incredibly thin at that time. And this, of course, was before America joined the war. And so this 38 ships set off across the North Atlantic, guarded by effectively a converted old passenger ship with some guns bolted on, called the Jervis Bay. And on the 5th of November 1940, the convoy was attacked by a German battleship called the Admiral Scheer, which was a radar, surface radar out hunting for these ships. And the Jervis Bay, in order to give the convoy time to scatter and get away, charged the German battleship hopelessly, completely hopelessly, and was sunk within about 20 minutes or so, with the loss of hundreds of lives. But their bravery gave a lot of the ships time to get away into what was the encroaching night. Several ships were hit and they were sunk. And then the Admiral Scheer turned her guns on the San Demetrio, and she was hit, and men started to be killed. and she started to go on fire. So since they were sitting on top of 11,000 tons of highly volatile aviation fuel, Captain quite rightly gave the order to abandon ship. The remaining survivors of the crew got off into 3 lifeboats. 2 of those lifeboats were picked up by other ships the next day, but 1 lifeboat with 16 men on board, 4 injured, was not picked up, and she suffered a horrendous storm and bone-chilling cold in the northern reaches of the North Atlantic in November, which is not a place you want to be. But they came across a ship, and as they got closer, they realized it was their own ship. It was the San Demetrio, and she was on fire, and she was horrendously badly damaged and burnt out. But they spent another night thinking about it. But eventually, they decided that they had a choice of freeze or burn, get back on board and burn to death, or freeze in the lifeboat. And they decided to get back onto the San Demetrio, really just to use it as a bigger lifeboat. But they got back on board. They managed to put the fires out. They had no navigation equipment, but they managed to get the engines working and the emergency steering, and they set out to get her home. And that's the story. Now, there's a second part of the story, which is that when they got home, there was a claim for salvage from the crew. So if you salvage a ship, you're entitled to a reward for doing so, generally paid by the insurance, because they're very happy to see a ship saved. But it's never been done, or it's unheard of for a crew to claim salvage against their own ship, and that became a celebrated law case. So we move in the story between the courtroom, which took place a couple of months later in January 1941, and what's going on the ship, and then what's going on back in London. So we have the lead character is young second mate called Arthur Hawkins. He was the guy in charge, and his wife was back in England, pregnant at the time, and so we pick up her story as well. So there were these different branches of the story that are going on, and that's the setup, if you like.
It's a very complete setup. Thank you for breaking down all of those different pieces for us and sort of introducing the history, and also describing for anyone watching or listening what it will be like to listen to this story, because it appears to move through the different locations. I've always enjoyed actually when there is a legal side to a story, and this is being told within a courtroom, but you also have the opportunity to experience what that situation that's being told sort of dryly in a courtroom looks like in real life when it's actually happening, and there's a context to the things being said to each other. I mean, telling someone you think we're in danger while you're standing on a street corner is one thing, or in a courtroom, but telling someone you think we're in danger because the boat you're on is on fire and it's loaded with fuel, that's a completely different experience for others. So I like the fact that you're able to, introduce that and tell it through the audio. I'm curious, now that we've got this story, how then does it move through everyone who we have on this call? What's the order of progression once we have the script, once everyone had the chance to learn about it and decide, okay, this is something we're all going to start working on? How then do you take this story and turn it into what we are all able to hear now? Who gets involved next, and what are the steps to getting to the actual part of recording and finishing that process? Who wants to take that?
Let me just start that off, and then the others can jump in and take over. But basically what we agreed to was that the format should be around 11 episodes or of 20 minutes each. That would be an appropriate way to start. So I broke the movie screenplay, actually the TV screenplay, which is a longer version because it included more of the court case, into what seemed to be 11 episodes with, which broke at the appropriate times. And then I started work on each episode. And as I finished each episode, they were looked at by Misha and Jack and Andrew and they came back with their comments as to what they think was working or what wasn't working, and what with suggestions as how to improve it. And so it was an iterative process of writing it and rewriting it and attacking it in a different way. And one of the key things, I think, was we managed to work out how to do it without any narration. And that was a big move.
Right. And that's what, Seth, what you talked about just there in terms of the courtroom as well. We were able to use that And it was something, initially we'd done it another way through another character, but it became apparent that we could do it more seamlessly through the court. The court is bringing up these different facts that happened, and of course, and it gave us a great way to be able to give a real way of getting across that exposition, as opposed to just a voiceover that Robert McKee would have screamed at the rooftops for in the voice of Brian Cox.
Yeah, well, it's fair to say, a lot, as you know, well, everybody knows who talks to me, I loathe the use of narration in audio. I find it a very lazy device. And I think that the great thing that we hit upon was using the court scene as the narrative spine to the story, and that actually then removed the need of having that narration, and it could all be told dramatically, and therefore the dramatic rhythm of the piece worked a whole lot better. I mean, narration has its place in audio drama sometimes, but always to be used in a limited form. In fact, Jack and I are talking about another project where the same conversation, where it was like, do we need this? No. Can we do this a better way and dramatically without narration? Yes. So that was very much the case with Unsinkable. And also, John, one of the early conversations we had was just to up the jeopardy. I mean, yes, it was based on truth, but we didn't have to be necessarily slavish to that truth. We wanted to add elements in that would dramatically up the stakes. That's my pizza arriving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the cliffhanger right there.
Another thing I have to give John and Misha credit for really listening to very, very early doors is that there was this trend right now, because particularly, bear in mind, this was pre-pandemic, before audio drama sort of really had the rocket that it needed because of shutdowns and production on film and television and stuff. There was a trend where people were literally trying to get their screenplays made or their TV pilots made, and they would turn around to say, you do audio, we'll turn this into a podcast, and then people will love my podcast and I get my TV or screenplay made off the back of the podcast. And it's a bit of a frustrating trend where basically people just sort of expect their screenplay lifted as is. So one of the things I think, when we were having that meal, I said, look, you're really going to have to look at the script. You're really going to break this down. You can't just take your screenplay and make it a piece of audio. And to John and Misha's credit, they went off and they worked, then they restructured, and they switched around, and they changed things to actually make it an episodic podcast scripted audio drama off the basis of that screenplay, rather than do what's a big mistake a lot of people make, which is just to take a screenplay and go, we'll just record it on audio and job done. And then we get the TV deal off the back of that. So fair play to the boys. They actually sat there, they listened, and, they spent a good 6-7 months reworking that script, didn't you?
Yeah, and I found it a really challenging but increasingly enjoyable process, is to take a scene which is mostly visual and say, okay, how do we make this dramatically interesting and rewarding as an audio piece? And if I can give an example, there's a moment that the ship had engine breakdown before the attack, and she had to stop for engine repairs. And obviously, it was an extremely nerve-wracking moment. It stopped in the North Atlantic when there were U-boats around the place. And I had a scene where the captain comes down to the engine room, and he just sort of knocks on a rail so that the engineers working below him can look up and see, and he taps his watch. Say how long, and the chief engineer looks at it, and he holds up 3 fingers, and then the captain leaves. So not a word is spoken in that scene. So to rewrite that in such a way that the captain can come down and get that information and make it dramatic, and in fact it is John Malkovich who's the one who calls up 3 hours. I think you'll enjoy how that scene works out when you hear it. And we had to do that for every single scene.
Right. Where he was
finding moments of show don't tell, but for audio or hear don't tell, coming out through it. And just to follow on as well, then, just from what you said, Jack, I think something John and I had, like you said, there was this trend of all of a sudden, we can't shoot anything. What are we going to do? And so maybe there were a whole bunch of people that said, hey, let's make things as audios, and some of which we've seen the result of that. There are no two ways about it. This will still be at some point, I think, a wonderful thing in the visual medium, and it's something we still want to pursue. But that didn't take away from the fact that we wanted to try and make this the best audio piece it could be, right? And that just period. You know, everything else on top, that's great, but we just approach this medium for what it is first. And, you know, the team we've got now, you know, we've got some of the leading people in the world, you know, as part of this, or adding to that, and they're excited about it solely as an audio as well. And it's been, I don't see it as less or more than. I just see it as different and something that is exciting as well. We get to push the boundary of something. We get to work, you know, in 3D audio, having waves that are going to feel like they're 80 feet high above people, coming over and down, create something really immersive. And you know, when you get to push the front of something, it's always an exciting place to be.
I think the other thing to remember about audio, and a lot of people who come into it think, oh, this is an easy gig, you know, it's cheap. Certainly, yes, it's cheaper than film and TV. Is it's its own narrative, format. You know, theatre has its own form, audio has its own form, television, drama has its own form. You know, film has its own form. And one of the big mistakes that is made in audio is too much exposition, is not being able to tell the story with an economy, with the dialogue, without drifting into your character sitting there. Well, now this is happening because X, Y, and Z, and I think that's actually a credit also to the process and John taking on board all the various notes he was getting from different directions. But there's an economy to the way the story is told, and there's an authenticity to how the characters speak and interact with each other, without it being exposition heavy. And I think and add to that what you can then do in terms of audio, in terms of the richness, the oral landscape, and how you can feed through that, through the use of music and sound design and whatever, you can feed a person's imagination. You can imagine a $200 million movie, but it's an audio movie, and it's something that many aspire to do. Some do it really well. Dirt Mags is probably at the top of his game in terms of that, whose most recent example is Sandman, which he continues to do, and he was certainly a huge influence to me when I got him first started. But
I think in some of that description, one of my favorite moments is actually quite early on in Unsinkable, is Captain Waite is on the stand in the courtroom, and he is asked to describe what life on the ship is like, and he just goes in the kitchen, in the engine room, out on deck, you know, what everyone is doing, and there's little scenes of each of the characters at work and talking about what they're doing, and it's a really nice overview of how the ship operates and what the characters are doing and what they're like. And that's a good example of showing audio without having any exposition.
You can imagine, like what you're talking about right there, you can imagine, and actually it's funny, we did the spotting session on that with Ben recently to go into some of that detail. You imagine a pan going through the walls across. You imagine the shot as it's happening, but it's done right. It's amazing what your mind will paint if you give it the direction.
Yes, and that's what I was doing as I sort of listened back over it. It worked really well.
I remember I was teaching some young people about audio and like how it was going to be awesome and it was going to be the future. And someone turned around and said to me, why is audio so great? And I said, because it's the most visual medium it is that exists. The pictures it paints in the mind's eye, it's singular. It's absolutely unique in the imagery that you can create in a listener's mind, particularly if you really work on the fact that podcasting as a delivery method is so intimate. It gets in your head. You know, it's not like radio where you could potentially treat it as wallpaper. Someone is actually asking to go into this world with you. And, this is an incredibly exciting project, which the world that is being built is so immersive, so thrilling and exciting that, you know, like Andrew says, you're going to see a $200 million movie in front of your imagination. And, you know, not for $200 million. It's not cheap.
Not even the T budget.
Not even the T budget.
And interesting, just to add to that, a lot of our actors, I mean, so our lead actors, two of them, John Malkovich and Brian Cox, had grown up doing radio, and they loved the medium, and that's really why they did it, because they got it instantly, and they really enjoyed doing it. I think Brian Cox spent 11 of his first years as an actor on a radio show, on a weekly radio show. So they got it instantly, but a lot of our actors who hadn't done a lot of this kind of work, they were all said the same thing, which is you just get into it, you create it yourself. You're not worried about, you don't have to do green screens or makeup or costume or hair or standing around for hours while they set up lights. You just make it yourself. Mm. That's why I think so many of the performances we were so blown away by, is because you could see, we had them on Zoom, but you could see and hear the actors just get into it. Mm-hmm. Understand and create their characters and the circumstances that they were in and deal with it. It was a really, really fun process to do.
Like you said, there's no bullshit, nothing in between, just you and the mic, and it doesn't allow for anything else to hide. It's just the truth of that sound, and it becomes a very pure medium for it.
We were having a conversation today when we were doing another show remotely, and it just came up in conversation that some actors come to radio thinking it's just a breeze, anyone can do it, and suddenly discovering it's a completely different acting muscle, and not all actors get it and can do it and can immerse themselves, as in that their voice is their tool for this. They can't have got any other part of their body to sell that performance. It's all about the emotion they give in their vocal performance. Mm-hmm. And I mean that's when you think of the scope of the cast we've got in terms of very successful and established film actors and television actors and theatre actors, and they really embraced this, and you'll see by the quality of the performance and the authenticity of the performance, and that's key for audio drama to work.
And we did this, Seth, largely with in an animation style. So, the majority of the actors are working in an isolated fashion, which of course worked for COVID very well. But it meant that, the imagination has to be there for the environment they're in. And, John and myself have to give, very specific direction of the feel of the scene, the energy, what's coming back and forth, and then hope that the 100 different performances all get pieced together, and you have coherent scenes that actually flow and go back and forth. And for the most part, it's really worked outstandingly well. We had one set of actors in Rupert Vansittart and who we had together, and it made sense. So their scenes are all together, and they were able to at Soundhouse, and it was really nice to have them as a pair. But by no means was it essential. But it certainly adds to it. And I think once we're out of COVID, I think everybody will be keen to be able to have some human interaction again. But I don't think it's detracted from what the overall piece has been able to bring.
One of the advantages of doing it with, every single person we recorded, by Zoom remotely in a studio. Apart from those pair, everyone was on their own, in all over the place. Some in LA, some in London. We had
Prague.
Natalie Emmanuel was in Prague. Boston, which is where John Malkovich was. Brian Cox was upstate Massachusetts. But in each case, you're taking each single performance and you're getting the take you want that is truthful and appropriate. Whereas if you've got 5 or 6 people around a microphone, you might get 4 of them doing a really good job, and one of them's not quite there, but you'll live with it. But in each instance, we were able to get exactly the performance, pretty much exactly the performance we were after from each person on each line. And I think it's starting to show as Helen's amazing work in putting together the soundscape for all the actors, and starting to listen to that. It's like you're not hearing a false note, or very rarely are you hearing a false note and thinking, well, let's see if there's another take we can use. But almost all of it was like, yeah, what we've got here is what we want.
Yeah, the only challenge. Sorry, Misha.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no, I was going to say the only challenge the only challenge, lots of challenges about doing it remotely, but actors generally like to feed off other actors and their energy and the performance. And so one of the challenges particularly is making sure, if you're doing everything individually, you've got to match, and doing them separately in different days and different weeks, but you've got to, if they're all meant to be in a scene together, they've got to match that energy of that scene.
Yeah.
And that takes an awful lot of concentrated and focus from the directors to ensure that they make sure that each actor hits that beat, because otherwise, when you get back to putting it all together and editing, if it doesn't match and someone's off on that energy, or someone's feels a bit,
exactly, something as subtle as the pace at which somebody is delivering something back at, or the volume or the amplitude. I mean, so many little variabilities, right? And so there are some cases where it's, hey, take one of this line, take 5 of this line from this person, take 1 of this word. I mean, there are some takes that, you know, have had some thorough massaging, to say the least. But it when it comes together, it comes together well. And it's like the equivalent of, you know, close up. Here's your close up. Here's your close up. Here's your close up. Each of those, and then putting them all back together in the big jigsaw puzzle, and arranging it until it hopefully flows beautifully.
It's an all Rubik's cube.
Rubik's cube is probably a better analogy. That's fair to say.
Yeah.
Well, I had an analogy for putting the dialogue together, and it was like doing stop motion with audio, because you take a little thing,
Yes.
move it a bit, get another bit, move it again, listen to it, and I and not for every single scene, but certainly with a lot scenes with a lot of characters, I would spend hours on it and then go, I'll listen to that back and go, it's 20 seconds long. What have I been doing for hours? And it was just literally that, moving little bits and pieces to make sure it all fitted together.
So
Yeah.
it was like
the Virgin Eyes as well. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's like a Rubik's cube, but in 3 dimensions.
Yes.
No, but it's that like you can listen to something 100 times and then you come away from it, and it's only then you can see it with some sort of subjectivity after a while, right? It's like the having virgin eyes or virgin ears on something that's more appropriate is the key, and it's amazing what a few, you know, frames or in this instance, you know, milliseconds one way or the other will make, just in the subtlest of changes. Yeah.
Now I'm curious because I think I had probably 10 or 15 follow-up questions that I was going to, you know, drop in, but then someone else would pick up and I'm like, never mind, they've got something better going on. Wait, never mind. That sounds better than what I was going to ask. But I am still going back just a little bit with the idea of, you know, we've got the story. Now we've gathered actors. We're working on the process. Helen, I heard something really interesting described. I think it was John, you were saying it, the idea of what she was creating with Soundscapes. And I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit more about Soundscapes, because it draws to mind for me initially that description of walking through the ship with the captain and seeing all of the different environments, or hearing all of the different environments and understanding what those cues are. And the idea of picturing it, I think, Misha, as you described it, as a camera moving along and panning along, but doing it so in audio description that allows the ear to then take in the information and create that wonderful imagination realm that you then sort of agree to step into. And you're creating that, Helen, with your soundscapes.
Well, now, not so much with the soundscapes, because that's the next stage that Misha is now working on with Ben. I was just working with the dialogue. So I was, like I said, I was doing a skeleton dialogue edit, and as Misha was saying, some of this was to my preference, some of it was, well, the majority of it was based on what I was given and the favorite takes and what the log sheet gave me. Occasionally it would say, I'm going to put that there, but I'm not sure. And I think when Misha listens to it, he'll probably move it around, or he might, like, you know, I was sort of conscious that my decisions weren't necessarily the ones that he would be the final ones made and the ones he and John would choose. But certainly mentally, when I was listening back to just the dialogue, I could hear the ship moving, I could hear the waves outside, I could hear the wind, and I could hear bells ringing, you know, I could hear the sound of the courtroom as it overlapped with the scenes. You know, it was in my head, and I did have to resist the urge to go dipping in my sound effects library and just, you know, dropping a couple of things in.
Yeah, but the spaces are still there on many occasions, and it's almost as if it's like it really it sounds very artsy fartsy, but it starts telling you what to do. The edit afterward tells you the gaps. It tells you, oh, here's what should happen here, here's what should happen here, and you know, it was it was a hell of a Rubik's cube to assemble.
And so Andrew's point about ensuring that the performances match each other in terms of location and what's going on. One of the things I was very careful to do when directing, and Misha and I co-directed every scene, every actor together. My primary job was to make sure the actors knew at every second of the day where they were, if they were on the ship, or if they were in a lifeboat, or if they're in a courtroom, or they're in London, exactly what the circumstance of what the environment was. How noisy is it in the engine room, in that bit of the engine room? What's it like when you're on the bridgeway? What's it like when you're on the galley? That's going to be a metal door closing, not a wooden door. He's standing on metal plating, not on wooden boards, so that the actors were able to respond knowing themselves what their environment was. And as the soundscape is, which is something I should be using now, as the sound design is being developed, I'm saying to our amazing sound designer, Ben, who is a BAFTA and Oscar winner for Whiplash, this, one of the notes I gave him is the ship, when this tanker, the Ambit Mitra, when she's rolling at sea, she'll be taking about 15 seconds to go back and forward and back again. That's how long it takes for that ship to make that move. So that's the noise period we're going to need for it to sound right. And so all those things, I was taking care of that. Misha has a really good ear for truthfulness in performance. So if he was feeling someone was being a bit actory or wasn't in it enough, that was Misha kind of, I think you're on an 8, you need to take it to a 10, or you're on a 10, you need to come down to a 5. So between the two of us, we were kind of looking after those things.
The specificity that John was able to inject in both of us, it really worked very well as a team. But that setup is everything in terms of being able to then give a judgment. And yes, then some actors are going to have their own interpretation of everything you give them, for sure. And then it's just, it's honing or whatever. But it's acting 101, really, in any instance. It's like, where have you come from? What do you want, and how specific are you going to be with those decisions, and getting into that was with what then enabled us to create these scenes. And as I said, when you hear it back and you put them together, I would hazard most people will not think about the fact that when somebody is speaking to somebody, they're actually giving that performance from thousands of miles away down a series of ones and zeros through a microphone.
And that brings us to the end of the Unsinkable team interview, part 1. That's just the first hour. There is more in store, but it's been my pleasure to introduce you to the Unsinkable team, who you now know as Helen Quigley, Jack Bowman, John Mawson, Misha Crosby, and Andrew Mark Sewell. They will be back for our second hour. You can find that is either the audio podcast, Storytelling with Seth, available on all your favorite podcast platforms. All you have to do is find it on the one you prefer, subscribe, and you won't miss part 2 or any of the future stories I have to share with you. You can also catch part 2 as a video interview by subscribing to this YouTube channel. And when you do, you'll make sure that whatever method you choose to enjoy, you'll get the chance to experience part 2 of this interview and so many other great conversations coming your way. I've been your host, Seth Singleton. Thank you again for joining me. I'll be back soon with more stories for you.